morning, good afternoon, good evening. The Constitution of Zimbabwe Amendment 2026 is a serious matter. And the nation is absolutely right to focus on it and to be seriously debating it. I have commented on it, on the shortcomings of that amendment and how it's seeking to deny the ordinary people a meaningful say in the governance of the country. But what I'm interested in this afternoon is the way forward. Already there's been a lot of talk of what should be done. And one of those is being offered by the likes of Tendai Biti and his group. I am alarmed that we are repeating the same mistake. The one important issue that no one out there can deny is that this whole amendment and the chaos that has been happening in the country, the fact that Zimbabwe is a failed state, we could have avoided and we should have avoided it. And so the question then comes, why did we fail to avoid it? And I've said on this platform, and I'll say it again, we have had the misfortune of having, in the first instance, ZANU-PF thugs who believe that they have the divine right to rule the country. ZANU-PF have shown that they paid lip service to one man, one vote, which was at the heart of the liberation struggle. As the nation went through the liberation struggle, one of the key issues that was emphasized there was that we wanted one man, one vote. It became one of the pillars in our fight to end white colonial rule. And yet, it must be said, by the time the country gained its independence, we had the misfortune of having a regime that had been paying lip service to one man, one vote. Because in 1980, we did not have one man, one vote. At the Lancaster House talks in London, PF ZAPU and ZANU-PF agreed that the two parties with freedom fighters in the field would withdraw their freedom fighters to designated assembly points during the campaign for the elections of the upcoming government. ZANU-PF agreed to that, signed on the dotted lines. But by the time they returned back home, they had changed their mind. They told they told some of their freedom fighters that they would remain in the field. And not only that, that they will be campaigning, telling the people that if ZANU-PF does not win the elections, the Bush War would continue. Of course, the people voted to end the Bush War. And so, one man, one vote, chucked straight out of the window. Zimbabwe has been a failed state because we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. For 46 years and counting. This amendment is just another step in ZANU-PF search to secure absolute power. Three years after the 1980 elections, ZANU-PF launched into the Kukurahundi. The primary purpose of that was to force the only other political party that posed serious political challenge to ZANU-PF's continued rule, i.e. PF-ZAPU, to give up its existence as an independent party and join ZANU-PF. The party was finally forced to do just that in 1987 when they signed the Unity Accord after the death of over 20,000 innocent Zimbabweans. The signing of the Unity Accord cleared the path for ZANU-PF to impose the de facto one-party state. That is the reality. And ever since, the country has suffered because elections were never free, fair, and credible. ZANU-PF used its position as the government of the day to impose the de facto one-party state. One of the most disheartening instances in Zimbabwe's political history was how in 2008, ZANU-PF was pressured by SADC to implement some democratic changes to ensure that elections were free, fair, and credible. They did. And the people seized that opportunity to vote for meaningful change. But when the regime, ZANU-PF, realized that they were losing the 2008 elections, they stepped in, took over from announcing the results, and reimposed the de facto one-party state. Here is an analysis of what actually happened in 2008.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He phoned Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost the election and I concede defeat. and I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns, was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day, when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, "You stay where you are." And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away, no? That's why, yeah. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat its people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I hear the nonsense coming out of people like Mbalula's mouth. They know it.
That is a historic fact. Mnangagwa and Chiwenga are the ones who decided to brush aside the democratic will of the people of Zimbabwe in 2008 to reimpose the dictatorship. And it was reimposed on the back of another murderous campaign. Zimbabwe is a de facto one-party state and has been drifting these last 46 years in that direction because we have a regime in ZANU-PF that believes that they have the divine right to rule the country. And the right to choose to loot the nation's wealth because they are the ones who spearheaded the liberation struggle. That is number one, why we are a failed state. We have got a corrupt, incompetent, tyrannical, vote-rigging ZANU-PF regime. The second reason is the people of Zimbabwe, by the late 1990s, realized that they needed to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. They risked everything to elect the opposition leaders into positions of power and authority. When Morgan Tsvangirai launched his MDC party in 1999, he called it the Movement for Democratic Change, promising the people of Zimbabwe that they will implement the democratic changes the country needed to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. We cannot say that the last 46 years we have not had the chance to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. We did. And during the GNU of 2008 to 2013, it was the golden opportunity to do so. What happened? Mugabe bribed the MDC leaders. They failed to implement even one token reform in 5 years of the GNU. At the time when ZANU-PF cronies were asked, why are MDC leaders not implementing the reforms? Their reply was very simple and very categorical. MDC they will not rock the boat. They are now part of the ZANU-PF. Ever since the GNU debacle, MDC leaders have participated in flawed elections, knowing fully well that they are flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they will only be giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. This is a historic fact. I've often played this video where Chamisa, just a few days before the elections, is telling the people that MDC, Triple C was going to win the 2023 elections. He even evokes the name of God.
Makorokoto Zimbabwe, nokuti hakuna munhu anomira kana denga raronga plan. Denga raronga plan, denga harifo iri. Plan ya Mwari haifo iri. Ini ndatanga kugadzira cabinet. There is no way we are not going to form a new cabinet. There is no way we are not going to have a celebration. There is no way we are not going to have an inauguration. Let's start preparing for our inauguration. Let's start preparing for our celebration.
Chamisa lied. He knew that without any reforms, the ZANU-PF was going to rig the 2023 elections. He also knew that by participating in those flawed elections, he and his Triple C friends were giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. So these are the two main components why Zimbabwe we are a failed state. ZANU-PF, who believe that they have the divine right to rule the country, and then the opposition, who sold out when they had the golden opportunity to implement the reforms. They failed to implement even one because Mugabe bribed them. So we are where we are now with this constitutional amendment number 20 of 2026, which is seeking to take this few remaining voting rights that the people have, because of those two main components. It is therefore shocking that we should be thinking of the way forward and entrusting the same individuals who landed us into this mess to chart the way forward. Here is what Tendai Biti was saying at the in response to the amendment bill in question.
We, as the Constitutional Defenders Forum, note with grave concern the formal introduction of a raft of proposed constitutional amendments presented to the first cabinet sitting of the year on the 10th of February 2026. What was previously dismissed as speculation is now regrettably the official position of the government of the day. In our view, the proposed amendments cause an existential threat to the existence of Zimbabwe as a nation state as we have known it for the past 45 years. The proposed amendments threaten to tear apart our beloved country into smithereens. The proposed amendments amounts to an overthrow, an illegal, unconstitutional coup d'etat on the people and constitution of Zimbabwe. Regrettably, one that is of much greater extent than the military coup that we saw and witnessed in November of 2017. The war of liberation was fought. Many of the people you see behind me are veterans of the liberation struggle that carried guns and sacrificed their youth to cross mountains and rivers to fight for the liberation and the decolonization of Zimbabwe. They are not here by accident. They are here because the proposed amendments are an insult, are a betrayal, are a selling out of the ideals, values, and the principles of the liberation struggle. One of those values and the principles was the important concept of one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, which is now being scattered and assaulted by the proposed constitutional amendments. The 2013 Constitution was a negotiated, people-driven process that culminated in a constitutional referendum on the 21st of March 2013, a referendum in which 93% of the population voted, 93% of those who voted in the referendum, amounting to 3 million Zimbabweans, voted to assent to a constitution. In assenting to that constitution, the people of Zimbabwe agreed to certain basic structures, certain basic foundations, certain basic pillars of that constitution. One of the basic pillars of that constitution was the demolition of the principle and concept.
I'd like to stop it there for a minute. It should be emphasized here that the likes of Tendai Biti, he was a senior MDC leader during the GNU. He was the finance minister, in fact. And one of the main reasons why Zimbabwe is facing all these problems, why we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections, even post the 2013 constitution, is because that constitution was weak. Whilst ZANU-PF Mugabe and these cronies spent a lot of time concentrating on making sure that that constitution was weak. The MDC leadership were busy enjoying the benefits of the gravy train, their snouts in the feeding trough, and they forgot to concentrate on what was happening. This is what enabled Mugabe and his cronies to present to the nation a feeble and weak constitution. The 2013 constitution is weak. And some of us said so at the time, but were ignored. MDC leaders, including Tendai Biti, campaigned urging people to accept it. And yet they've never taken the responsibility when that constitution failed to deliver free, fair, and credible elections and all the other rights. They've never taken the responsibility to admit that they had made a mistake. I would just like to play a video of Jonathan Moyo spelling out some of the events of the GNU.
Is Emerson Mnangagwa telling the world that he had nothing to do with Gugrahundi atrocities?
He has reached out to those who were affected.
He has not done that. That is a lie. First of all, I was in the leadership with him during the making of Zimbabwe's new constitution that was adopted in 2013. Emerson Mnangagwa and Patrick Chinamasa, who were the frontline voices for ZANU-PF during that process, fought very hard to ensure that the national peace and reconciliation process that is in the constitution does not have the teeth.
Or see light of the
first of all, they didn't want it. They are the ones who opposed it in ZANU-PF. Emerson Mnangagwa and Patrick Chinamasa led the opposition of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. They did not want it. They came to the Politburo. We had long nights debating. One of the contentious issues is that they didn't want that commission at all. Emerson Mnangagwa, I want to say and place this on record, did not want the commission. That's number one. Number two, as a result of that, we ended up with a whittled down commission that did not include truth. The proposal was to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You cannot have peace and reconciliation when you've had atrocities such as Gugrahundi without truth telling. Emerson Mnangagwa and Patrick Chinamasa succeeded in removing the truth component and got ZANU-PF to accept the current structure that is in the constitution of peace and reconciliation only on grounds that it did not include truth and that it would not look into Gugrahundi atrocities. That's number one. And this is very important because he can't come today and say, I have done this, when very recent history tells a different story.
Professor Jonathan Moyo was talking specifically on one aspect of the new constitution. If the truth be told, the whole constitution was weak. And this is why we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Why basic human rights like the right to hold peaceful demonstrations have been violated, even after the passing of the 2013 Constitution. The ZANU-PF representative in the committee that drafted that constitution, Paul Mangwana, boasted soon after the March 2013 referendum that accepted that constitution that Mugabe had dictated that constitution. The likes of Moge Changirai wanted to claim that actually the constitution was an MDC child. But the truth of the matter is, it was not. That constitution has been weak and feeble. And this is why the country has struggled to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Because as long as the nation's constitution is weak, you can do anything. And right now, ZANU-PF is trying to do something else to that constitution. It's trying to change the procedures, the election procedures, to remove the people's right to elect the president. Because ZANU-PF has since found out that rigging constituents, parliamentary elections, is much easier than rigging the presidential ones. A few weeks ago, Julius Mawarire revealed that Mnangagwa lost the 2018 elections. He only managed to get 32% of the vote. And so the party had to find ways of getting him over the line. And one of those ways was that in those polling stations where Mnangagwa had done very well, the results of those polling stations were entered more than once. The 2018 court challenge of the presidential elections revealed that there were 16 polling stations in which there were identical votes for Mnangagwa, identical votes cast for Chamisa, identical spoiled votes, etc., etc. The only logical explanation of that would be that these were not two distinct polling stations with identical results. It was just one polling station whose results were entered twice. And one other notable feature in all these 16 polling stations was that in all of them, Mnangagwa did very well. And this is where it got really interesting. The Constitution is very clear. The electoral law is very clear. The election process says the vote counting must be done at a polling station. And the results of that must be pinned on the board for the public to hear. The ZEC official will have a copy of the results. This is the so-called V11 form. And all the candidates or their representative will get a copy. All the other relating materials relating to that election would be put in the ballot box, including the unused ballots, the counted ballots, everything will be put in the ballot box, and it will be sealed. And all the officials involved in that polling station will attach their signature, and then the box will be sealed. This is done for a specific purpose, so that if there should be any court challenge of the result, then the court will order the sealed ballot boxes to be opened in the presence of all the officials who will confirm that the box had not been tampered with before it's opened. So in this case here, the minute it was flagged that there were 16 polling stations with identical results, the most logical thing to have said is, okay, let's go to those 16 polling stations. Let's open their sealed ballot boxes. As I said, there were not 16 independent polling stations with identical polling results. They were duplicate. It's one thing to re-enter the results of a V11 form of one polling station and enter it again. It's another thing to duplicate the ballot box for it. That was something that they just simply could not do. And everybody knew it. And you would think that Chamisa's lawyers would have taken that up and asked that the court should demand that those ballot boxes be opened. Indeed, Chief Justice Malava, who presided over the Constitutional Court, asked Chamisa's lawyers, why did you not ask to open the ballot boxes? An obvious question. And his reply was, they didn't want to open those boxes because they didn't want to drink from a poisoned well. Shocking. Here is the opposition protecting the regime. Conniving with ZANU-PF to cover up that these elections were rigged. But let's continue with this press conference that was given by the Diabetes.
Concept of an imperial president. We said no to an imperial president. One of the principles and basic structures of that constitution was the principle of free, fair, and regular elections. And the constitution itself defined a basic pillar of that constitution as regular elections that ought to and that were supposed to take place within 5 years. One of the basic pillars of that constitution was that there will be power rotation, that a man and a woman had no right to rule Zimbabwe for years, that a term limit was 5 years, and if people liked you, they would give you another 5-year term to make a maximum of 10 years. That term limits were also imposed. Those term limits were also imposed on other key members of the executive, the Commissioner General of the Army, the Commander of the Army, the Commissioner General of the Zimbabwe Prisons and Commission Service is also subject to those term limits. So term limits are a foundational core component of the Constitution of Zimbabwe as we agreed to it in 2013. One of the basic principles we also agreed with was that the Constitution was so fundamental that it won't be altered, and that there were certain provisions that would not be altered without the consent and express consent.
I'll stop it there. The point I was trying to make here, or I'm making here, is that the likes of Tendai BT are now championing the fight to stop this amendment going through. What he has gone on to say in this video is actually that they are going to work with ZANU-PF because there are elements in ZANU-PF who also don't want, excuse me, this amendment to go through. That is going to work with his former colleagues, Nelson Chamisa and anybody else who are interested in fighting to stop this amendment. I think many Zimbabweans out there have embraced that as maybe strategic. What I'm saying to you is that is not strategic. I have said here that we are in this mess because of ZANU-PF. Yes, there are elements in ZANU-PF who do not want this amendment to go through. And this has been discussed ever since this ED 2030 agenda started, notably Chiwenga and his supporters. I have said on this platform, and I will say it again, Chiwenga objects to Amendment 2026 because it seeks to let Mnangagwa stay in power beyond 2028. Chiwenga is not a Democrat. The video I showed you earlier on of Professor Ibo Mandaza talking about the events of 2008, it was Mnangagwa and Chiwenga who masterminded Operation Mavotera Papi. It was Chiwenga who was the army commander responsible for the military coup of 2017. And when it succeeded, he resigned from the army to take up his post as VP. Mawarire, in a video a few weeks ago, admitted that the army was behind the rigging of the elections in 2018. They are the ones who saw to it that Mnangagwa, we had lost those elections by winning only 32%, was helped over the line by the army. These are Chiwenga's friends. These men are not Democrats. They are only against this amendment because it is politically expedient for them. I object to people like Tendai Biti, Nelson Chamisa, and the other Triple C leaders championing this fight to stop the amendment 2026 on the grounds that they are the ones who, when they had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms, to dismantle the ZANU-PF dictatorship, sold out. They failed to implement even one token reform. If they'd done so, we would not be in this mess. In short, I object to people being stampeded into believing that Tendai Biti and whatever coalition he gets from ZANU-PF operatives who are also unhappy about the constitution and his own former sellouts in MDC Triple C will deliver a democracy that we want. The people of Zimbabwe are in this mess because we have failed to address this fundamental problem of bad governance for 46 years and counting. We have sent the MDC Triple C leaders to implement the reforms. And for the last 26 years, including the 5 years in the GNU, they failed to implement even one reform. I believe it is irresponsible, to say the very least, that the nation should trust such individuals to do anything at all from henceforth. The danger with trusting people like Tendai Biti is that even if they were to succeed in stopping this amendment going through, will they stop ZANU-PF rigging the 2028 elections? The answer is no. They have participated in flawed elections in the past, out of greed, and they will participate in those 2028 elections for the same reasons. So the best we can ever expect from this lot is that ZANU Mnangagwa is stopped from staying into power beyond 2028. I do not see the difference between that and what happened in 2017. where we stopped Mugabe continuing as the dictator, but only to replace him with Mnangagwa. And IBT and his MDC CCC friends endorsed the military coup of 2017. They asked their supporters to come out in support of that coup. Are we not being dragged into a similar situation this time? I believe we are. Some people have argued that stopping the amendment going through is the number one priority. I would like to state it here and now that the amendment is just one of the consequences of our failed political system. It's one of the consequences of our feeble and weak constitution. The root cause of it, the main problem, is our failure to hold free, fair, and credible elections. So if we fail to stop ZANU-PF rigging the next elections, we will still have a dictatorship, albeit it will not be Mnangagwa. I refuse to accept stopping Mnangagwa as a victory. What we should be focusing on is the victory to dismantle the dictatorship itself. Even if Mnangagwa, the amendment was to go through, if we remain focused with people who are going to focus on the delivering of stopping ZANU-PF rigging elections and getting away with it, even if this amendment goes through, ZANU-PF will still have to face elections in 2030. If we have our eyes fixed on that ball, make sure that ZANU-PF does not get away with another rigged elections, even if it's 2030. What will happen then is that ZANU-PF will be forced to go into a GNU in 2030. The GNU is distinct from a ZANU-PF dictatorship. We cannot have a dictator in a GNU. And this GNU will be given the same task as the 2008 to 2013 GNU, to implement the democratic reforms and to come up with a truly democratic constitution. We will have the second bite at the cherry. That will be the real victory. And that should be our focus. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.